Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Audrey Stewart, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, I am so excited to welcome you to tonight's event with Dean Jobb, discussing his new book, The Case of the Murderous Dr. Cream, The Hunt for a Victorian Era Serial Killer. He is joined tonight in conversation by Amy Stewart. Through good times and bad, Harvard Bookstore will continue to bring authors and their work to our virtual community. We have an amazing summer in the midst of it, and we're so excited to share it with you. So please make sure to check out our event schedule on harvard.com/events, where you can also sign up for our email newsletter and browse our shelves from home. This evening's discussion will conclude with some time for your questions. If you have a question at any time during the talk, go to the Q&A button on your screen and we'll get through as many as time allows. If you'd like to purchase a copy of The Case of the Murderous Dr. Cream, there will be a link in the chat where you can purchase. All sales through this link support Harvard Bookstore, so thank you. There will also be a link for donation in the chat if you would like to give additional support to Harvard Bookstore. Without your continued support and patronage, this virtual author series wouldn't be possible. Thank you so much for tuning in support of our authors, our incredible booksellers, and our landmark independent bookstore. We sincerely appreciate your support, especially now. And as you may have experienced in virtual gatherings, technical issues may arise. If they do, we'll do our best to resolve them as quickly as we can. Thank you in advance for your patience and understanding. Now, I'm so pleased to introduce tonight's speakers. Dean Jobb is an award-winning author and journalist. He is a professor of creative nonfiction at the University of King's College in Halifax, Nova Scotia. He is the author of 8 books, including Empire of Deception, which the Chicago Writers Association named the Nonfiction Book of the Year. Dean's work has been published in the Chicago Tribune, Toronto's Globe and Mail, and the Irish Times. His work as an investigative reporter has been nominated for Canada's National Newspaper and National Magazine Awards and is the 3-time recipient of the Atlantic Canada's Top Journalism Award. He is joined today by Amy Stewart. Amy is the New York Times bestselling author of Wicked Plants and The Drunken Botanist, which I learned today has even had a few bars named after it. She's also written several novels in her Cop sister series, the first of which is Girl Waits with Gun. Her writing has received several awards, including a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship and the American Horticultural Society Book Award. Her books have sold over 1 million copies worldwide and has been translated into 18 languages. Tonight, they're discussing The Case of the Murderous Dr. Cream. In the span of 15 years, Dr. Thomas Neal Cream murdered as many as 10 people. Structured around Dr. Cream's trial, Dean's writing exposes the blind trust given to medical practitioners as well as the flawed detection methods, bungled investigations, corrupt officials, and the stifling morality of Victorian society that allowed Dr. Cream to commit these crimes. The New York Times review of books said, Jobb's excellent storytelling makes the book a pleasure to read. And on that note of praise, I'll turn things over to our authors. Dean, Amy, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're thrilled to have you both here. The virtual stage is yours.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's good to be here, and it's good to see you, Dean.
Good to see you, Amy.
I should let people know that what connects the two of us is not just that we share a publisher, which we do, but also that I wrote a book called Wicked Plants that is sort of about the dark side of the plant world. So that includes a lot of poisonous plants. And my idea with this book was that I didn't care if it could kill someone, I wanted to know who it had killed. So the only way that a plant could make it into the book is if I had a story to tell. You know, I needed a victim, a villain, a body buried in the backyard. So one of those plants was the strychnine tree, which is a tropical tree. Most people have probably never seen one. And the poison strychnine is pretty well known, but one of its most famous practitioners is your guy, Dr. Thomas Neal Cream.
That's right.
Yeah, so I was delighted to read more about him because, of course, I only made glancing contact with each of these villains as I went, but you have gone all in on Dr. Thomas Neal Cream, and it's an extraordinary book. And you guys, let me just tell you, what I love about a book like this is when it's very immersive and you really feel like you're in that world, but then you flip to the back and you can see all the research that went into it. And you can see that this is not just lyrical storytelling, it's an insane amount of research. And I have to confess that I read the footnotes first. I skipped straight to the back. I wanted to know where you'd gone, what you found, how you found it. And so I hope you won't mind if I start by just asking you, when you came to this subject, what were the unanswered questions about him that you had, that you were able to answer through the research? In other words, what sort of new were you able to get at as you were doing this research on him?
Well, I think it was approach. I came in with a central question. I mean, obviously, this is a horrific story of this serial poisoner who killed so many people and ended so many lives tragically. But I wanted to understand how he got away with it so many times.
Mhm.
How over this course of years, and a 15-year period, but he spent 10 years in prison for one of the murders before he was freed to kill again. So really, in the space of 5 years, he did these crimes. How did he get away with it? So I wanted to look at each case as thoroughly as possible to understand the gaps in policing, law, procedures, forensics, whatever it was that explained how this monster was literally free to kill and kill again. And that meant really a basic sort of research approach. What is known? I looked at some of the secondary work that had been done, some of the studies of cream, and there aren't that many.
Yeah.
And what was missing? Where were the gaps? And that led me to original courthouses, original court files, and many of them untouched in 130 years.
Right. So let's walk us through, kind of give us the thumbnail of what you knew about him going into this. Like what had you heard and how had you heard it when you started?
Well, I research a lot of true crime for stories, book ideas, and that means I'm rattling around in the newspapers of the late 19th century.
Uh-huh.
It's impossible not to run into Cream. His name is not known now, but he was a sensation in his time. The sheer scale of his killing in 3 different countries, and his final 4 murders coming so closely, a few years on the heels of Jack the Ripper. With Victorian society really realizing that there was a new breed of killer out there, what we know as a serial killer, term that didn't exist for many more decades. I knew some of the outlines of the story. Knew he was Canadian, knew he was a doctor, knew he had killed in 3 countries. But it was hard to get a handle right off the bat on how many murders did he commit. Some seemed iffy.
Okay.
Some were more conjecture. Anyway, so it meant I had to start from the beginning. And so that just led to sort of a systematic look um, at what was known, but also where there should be materials. But again, my organizing thesis really was, sure, I have to tell the details of what a horrible man this was and the horrible deaths he inflicted with strychnine on his victims. But I really wanted to understand the Victorian society that fostered and allowed him to get away with this, the kind of power imbalance or privilege of this rich, grew up in a rich family, this doctor who
Yeah.
could evade suspicion, and what were the flaws or mistakes made by police, forensic scientists and toxicologists that enabled him to do this.
Right. I mean, it's so interesting. As I'm sure you know, as someone who researches the past a lot, the themes that we see in the past, we see again in the present. It's astonishing and almost chilling how many times I'll be researching something from 100 or 150 or 200 years ago, and it's like, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, not as much has changed as I thought. So with him, we've got somebody who's a physician who's got a certain amount of respect and power and status because of that. And with his victims being women, you know, we have victims who have much less status and who don't matter as much. And so the question of whose murders matter, whose disappearances matter, and how closely aligned is the murderer with the power structure that's maybe in a place to investigate or arrest him. Those are all themes we're seeing right now in 2021. Like it's astonishing. And so for you to come at it with that question, you know, it's not so much what did he do, but how did he get away with it? It's like there must have been a lot of moments where you thought, oh yeah, I could have predicted that one.
Well, yeah, as you noted, he preyed on women who were on the margins,
Yeah.
vulnerable women. His first 5 murders of women were invariably women who came to him. He would perform illegal abortions,
Mm-hmm.
and these were women who were pregnant, not married, desperate to terminate their pregnancies. So desperate that they came to him. This is one of the really troubling and factors, or one of the really the betrayal that Cream inflicted on his victims. Jack the Ripper stalked his victims. Cream's victims came to him,
Yeah.
thinking he would help them, thinking he would help them terminate their pregnancies. And then his final 4 victims in London, England, were sex workers, and he was a big customer of the sex workers of the Lambeth neighborhood, and decided he would induce them to take his strychnine-laced medicine when he preyed on that class of victims. So in both cases, vulnerable women who are either driven into his clutches, or he's able to convince, because he's a doctor, that he's giving them beneficial medicine, not poison.
So set up the time frame for us. So when was the first victim, and what was his history as a medical practitioner prior to that first victim? Help us anchor this.
He came over as a child with his family to Quebec City. His father built a very wealthy timber merchant and timber exporting firm. Cream grew up in comparative wealth and comfort. Religious family. Cream was taught Sunday school, sang in the church choir, and there was money to send him to McGill Medical School in Montreal, which was the top medical school in Canada at the time. In 1876, he graduated, and almost immediately took what he learned and started using it to kill. Within a few months, he had become engaged to a young woman in rural Quebec, and she became pregnant. He performed an abortion that almost killed her. This exposed the pregnancy, exposed the scandal. He was forced to marry Flora Brooks. And then immediately, the day after the wedding, announced he was going to London, England to further his studies. He never saw her again. But in the months that followed, he sent her medicine, and her health was fragile after the abortion. And in retrospect, and even at the time, her family doctor was very suspicious of this, told her not to take the medicine, but she did die within a year. The doctor was highly suspicious that Cream was responsible, didn't go to the authorities. Cream got away with that murder, and set up practice in London, Ontario. One of his patients who'd come to him for an abortion dies of chloroform poisoning, staged to look like a suicide. Cream becomes a suspect, talks his way out of it, escapes to Chicago, was never charged, and then in Chicago performs a surgery on a woman who dies, botches the operation. He actually stands trial at that point. Now, again, he's almost been caught once.
Yeah.
He was a prime suspect. Stands trial, but his father has the money to buy him the best of legal representation. A lawyer also known to bribe juries, although there's no direct evidence of that. But by whatever means, Cream is acquitted of that crime, and then goes on to poison 2 more women who'd come to him for abortions. So now we're up to 1881, and Do you want me to continue on?
You might as well. Let's
Yeah.
run down the timeline. I think it's
So he murders two more women. Again, patients had come to him. But a strange MO starts emerging. He starts accusing druggists of botching his prescriptions, putting too much strychnine in, deflects the blame to them, starts threatening blackmail. But this all comes to grief in late 1881 when he kills the only man he killed, who was the husband of a woman he was having an affair with. He sent medicine to this patient in a northern Illinois town called Belvedere. Patient died, and Cream ends up charged and convicted of that murder and ends up in Joliet prison, supposedly for the rest of his life. But if you've been doing a count, we have 6 murders to this point. After 10 years, through help from his family, money from his father's estate, he's effectively able to buy his way out of prison, goes to London, commits his final 4 murders.
Yeah. It's an extraordinary trajectory, and I think it speaks a lot to one thing about that era, which is that was a time where you could move and leave your past behind. We didn't have ID cards, we didn't have social security numbers, we didn't have photo identification of any kind. Even the police, if the London police wanted to alert the Chicago police about something, they were giving descriptions, and it's very easy to forge documents if you need to forge documents. So the fact that he keeps moving is very much what a criminal at that time could do to get away with their crimes.
The Canada-U.S. border was no impediment. He not only easily went to Chicago before he was captured for this murder in Belvedere, Illinois. He escaped back into Canada, but was tracked down. And as you said, he could. Someone like Cream could escape his past. He couldn't escape headlines. And at various points, when he was rearrested or arrested for a new crime, there would be reports about some previous trial or court proceeding or death. But the policing organizations were way behind. There wasn't the kind of central registries and information sharing we know now. This is the pre-fingerprint era. So there aren't a lot of forensic detection tools. And after Cream served his time in Joliet, a man who'd murdered 6 people by now, but although he'd only been convicted of 1, when he went to London, he found a very simple way of evading exposure from his past, or having his past exposed. He simply dropped his surname Cream and told everyone his name was Thomas Neal. And that seems like it wouldn't work, but it took some very enterprising and smart news people in America, when they saw the headlines coming out of London, to realize it was the same person. And it took Scotland Yard weeks to realize that Thomas Neal and Thomas Neal Cream were one and the same.
Yeah. And now for you doing this research, like you said, there's a lot in the newspapers, and of course it's getting easier and easier to be able to sort of piece newspaper chronologies together and figure out who knew what when based on what was running in the newspapers. But I mean, you uncovered some primary source documents, and to me, doing research, this is always the moment when my heart just turns over in my chest. Is when I can get my hands, or at least just get my eyeballs on some primary documents. So I'm thinking about the court stuff that, if I'm remembering this right, no one else has seen. So I'm so interested in hearing about the stuff that you brought to light that had never been seen by anyone before.
Well, I'll give you one example. I was reading the best secondary account. There was a Canadian scholar named Angus McLaren did a book on Cream about 35 years ago. It's very well done. But reading about his London, Ontario case, the patient who was poisoned with chloroform, and I'm thinking, well, where's the inquest? Where's the inquest file? There's no reference to it. It's all newspaper accounts. So I thought, well, there has to be. And this is where being a journalist comes in handy. And I teach my students this, you assume that the documents exist. I like to borrow a term that the truth is out there.
Yeah.
And,
Right.
and 9 times out of 10, you're right. And the time that it's a wild goose chase, you learn so much on the way that you use in the book anyway, by other details. So I thought, well, there must be an inquest. No kidding. It took me 2 minutes on the Archives of Ontario website to have the file name and number. I had to go to Toronto. I probably could have had it copied, but I was going to go to Toronto to do it. Never been seen before. The court file of the case that sent him to prison is still in the courthouse in Belvedere, the Boone County Courthouse in North Belvedere, Illinois. And just a funny aside, I thought it would be, well, it would be hard for them to find it. It'd be in dead storage or something.
Mhm.
Well, I was told to talk to this veteran court administrator, and it took a few calls to catch her in her office. And so I started a very long lead in about what I was doing. And she goes,
Yeah.
"Oh yeah, that file's on my desk." She had actually pulled a file because she was doing a history of the Boone County Courthouse. And this was one of the sort of storied cases in the history.
Right.
So, you never know.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can be very easy to find the past. But that, again, that was a court file that had not been used and was full of verbatim transcripts, things I could just mine for to understand that trial. I mean, you get all the news coverage, but to get the full story from a court file, and it's you can't beat it, and it's like a treasure hunt. You must agree,
Yes, it
Louis,
is.
that you suddenly struck gold when you find something like that.
Right. And so was there anything in there that came as a big shock or a big revelation or that changed your understanding of
Well,
the
in little ways, sometimes bigger ways. Um, my idea was to give the definitive story, so it all becomes part of that process. But I'd even because I'm on the road and I'm trying to maximize time. I mean, I'm using the iPad, taking pictures, but you're reading as you go. You can't help it but read. And I would see um, pith, funny comments or pithy phrases that I thought, well, that'll probably go in the book.
Yeah.
It gave a more complete picture. And I didn't just do that with court files. Another thing that I would give as a caution to anyone who wants to dig into history like this and be complete is not every newspaper is digitized.
Yes.
Newspapers.com, millions and millions and millions of pages of old newspapers, and it's an invaluable tool. But I knew there were 6 daily newspapers in Chicago
Hmm.
in the time Cream was there. Only 2 are digitized. So I spent days going through microfilm reels, old school style,
Yep.
Chicago Library. But you've got to do that. And came out with a reams of paper. And I found, and again, I found news coverage of his trial, details that weren't in other coverage and
Hmm.
weren't in other studies. So those are always great, great victories. You feel like you're getting closer to the more complete picture and as complete a picture as you can get.
Yeah, I've spent those days in library basements myself, and it is a chore because, of course, you put yourself on a plane or a train to go to that town to look through those microfilm. You can't just drop in for an hour once a week. I mean, the meter's running here, so
Yeah,
so you're down there for hours and hours, getting a little seasick, turning through the pages. And the good news is that if it's something like a court case, at least you know what dates to focus on.
yeah.
Otherwise, it's 10 years worth of daily newspapers looking literally at everything on every page, hoping to get a glimpse of what you're after.
Which you do a bit of
Yeah.
because sometimes the dates might be a little off or the coverage might be a couple of days later.
Hmm.
But the serendipity of the little details you find about life in Chicago at the time or similar cases or what have you. I really enjoy the fact that you stumble into um, material that you would never have looked for.
Right.
But even when you find the article you're looking for, I have to look at what else is on the page. What
Yes.
was going on in Chicago that day? What was the cost of furniture in that ad? You know, what were the other crazy ads for doctors, and what were they claiming? And there was a lot of quackery in Chicago at the time. So I found wonderful ads. The fellow who could use a stone to cure almost any disease and things
Right.
like this. And Cream was accused of being a quack in one of his trials. So I was
Yeah.
able to draw on that. So I always tell my students that the time on research is never wasted. You know, you absorb so many background details as well.
Oh, absolutely. It's the one thing that I could never hire out. I
Yeah.
mean, I've hired a researcher if I need someone to physically go to a specific archive and photocopy 3 documents and pay the $10 when I can't fly there. But things like reading through the newspapers, I had the same thing. You know, my novels are all set in the 1910s, and it's the exact same deal. You know, there's the article that I was looking for on that page, but then there's actually 5 other novels on the same page, right? Like, you know, there were times when I wanted to like send out a text to all the other writers in the world and say, get over to the Patterson Library with me and look through these microfilm. All of your next novels are on the pages of these newspapers. Everything is fascinating in those papers.
Or that's where we find our next books.
That's where we find our next books,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Well, so I've a couple of things that I want to know. One is, in looking at what you could find about his early life, do you draw any conclusions about why this man did what he did? I know that the question of why was not your primary question, but what on earth led this man to become a person who murders women?
Well, I delved into the why as best I could,
Yeah.
hamstrung by the fact that he never claimed any kind of madness or insanity. So the defense was never raised, and that meant that there were no expert evidence. There's no evidence of any assessments. Late in the game, as he's facing the gallows, there's a suggestion of mental illness should save him from the gallows, but there isn't much, and it's easily discounted. Plus, there was so much method in his madness, his calculating use of strychnine, his deliberate targeting of people and inducing them to take it. I mean, it wasn't. There was so much calculation, deliberation in what he did. Um, in his background, again, a privileged background, part. I think there's some clues in how self-centered and narcissistic he was. He
Okay.
was a very selfish young man who
Mhm.
flaunted his wealth and jewelry, was shunned by his classmates at McGill, who, when they were interviewed years later by investigators, said, you know, they didn't like him because of this. So self-centered. His mother died when he was 19. That's old enough that it shouldn't have had you know, it's not like he was really young at the time, but he was very devoted to his mother. And by all accounts, it was a horrible lingering illness and death. And he was really badly affected by it. But that again, in its own. I wonder if the clues are in that forced marriage that he got out of by sending medicine, tainted medicine to Flora Brooks, his wife,
Yeah.
whether that somehow started to snowball into a more general hatred of women, because there's no question, because of the way he targeted women, that he had this burning hatred of women, which only became more intense as he continued to kill and even perfect the way he could deliver or induce people to take the strychnine medicine he was offering. He actually sought out, when he got to London, gelatin capsules, which were fairly new at the time. But these allowed him to put in a lethal dose of bitter strychnine that someone would take because the taste wouldn't cause them to spit it out or not take enough.
Right. Yeah, it's one of those poisons that taste terrible. So you have to find a way to get it past people's taste buds.
That's right. And he used his medical knowledge and his access to things like gelatin capsules and supply of strychnine
Yeah.
To engineer these murders.
And we should say it's a terribly cruel way to die. It's not a kind poison that sends you off to a peaceful rest. It sends a flood of unstoppable pain signals to your brain, and people can die of a heart attack from the reaction to the pain. Like it is an incredibly painful, incredibly torturous, cruel way. Even among poisons, it would be one of the worst.
And maybe this helps build a picture of what's going on in this demented mind of his, is that he knows this is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's not like he says, well, I've heard, strychnine can be very effective. No, he knows exactly the excruciating deaths he's going to inflict on his victims. And he also engineers it that he's nowhere nearby. Everyone's instructed to take the medicine before bed or when he's long gone.
Right, he's away when it happens.
And he's killing from a distance.
Yep.
One of his medical instructors had a line that stood out for me when I was going through McGill archives to understand medical training and any reference to him I could find. But in one of his classes, Prof said, urged the students to be godlike, to come between the living and the dead. And I thought, godlike, that's exactly like a God complex, Creamhead.
Mm-hmm.
He could decide who would live and who would die by what he put in the medicine.
Yeah.
And he could kill at a distance.
Right.
Just a chilling idea, that he must have somehow taken pleasure in knowing the agony he was inflicting on his victims at a safe distance where he didn't have to worry about escape or being caught at the scene.
Right. There's no possibility that he was thinking, well, I'm doing them a favor. This poor destitute woman who's a prostitute and pregnant, and I'm going to do her a favor and I'm going to send her out of this world. I mean, opium was available, right? He could have sent her very peacefully out of this world, but he didn't. He chose to really torture and hurt.
And there's no sense that it was personal. Many of these, or several of these women, seem to have had no history with him. They weren't he was a regular customer of a couple of them. But the women in London, the sex workers, no. He seems to have decided who would live and who would die by his own accounts or bragging. He had frequented brothels and sex workers in Lambeth throughout the many months he was killing sporadically in London. So he had opportunity to kill many more.
Yeah, I mean, not all his patients died.
No, that's right.
Some of them, yeah.
So how did he decide? And I don't think it wasn't a mercy killing kind of situation. Yeah. I don't think there's no sense of that anyway. He just seems like a very erratic man, obviously, but who just also at some point decided, this is my next victim.
Right.
Very deliberately set out to kill him.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you came into this, as you said in the beginning, you came into this with this question of, how is it that he got away with it? And that's the central question of the book. And in some ways, the answer is obvious when you think about a powerful man and powerless, marginalized women. But tell us kind of what the conclusion was that you came to, or what's the insight that you've come away with?
Well, I think that there's a lot of insight here into Victorian society, the repression, the stigmatization of women and second-class status of women, the stigmatization of sex workers, of women who are pregnant out of wedlock, the double standard. No one seems to blame the father, but one commentator said, well, for a woman, this is a living death. So in the desperation of women to end pregnancies, Cream saw opportunity. Presumably these were also paying customers, so he was making money off the ones he didn't murder, but it also gave him a seemingly endless supply of potential victims. When he gets to London, He targets prostitutes, as I said. No suggestion that he's not practicing medicine at that point, but he's known as a doctor. He makes that known. And in terms of things like the power imbalance, or the privilege, or the space that a professional man like him was given, in his case, to kill, one of his victims, in her death throes, as she's dying from strychnine, explains that she had taken these pills from a customer. And her landlady says, well, why would you take pills from a stranger? And she says, he wasn't a stranger, he was a doctor. And that encapsulated exactly how Cream was able, in on one level, on that level, how Cream was able to kill. He was trusted. Even when he, like I said, even when he didn't have a medical practice, but he made it known he was a doctor. And that was good enough for people to trust him, to their detriment.
Right, right. And I think at that time, of course, the women, had all of those cases gone to trial, the victims would have been put on trial as much or more than the perpetrator was, which is something that we still kind of see today. But very much there would have been questions about, well, who was she? And it would not have been treated like the murder of a respectable woman, or the murder, So that kind of victim blaming.
In fairness, in this case, one of his, a woman he thought he'd murdered, actually had fooled him. He thought he'd watched her take the medicine. They were on the Thames embankment. This was Lou Harvey, and she fooled him. It was kind of dim gas lighting on the walkway, and she dropped the pills after he checked her hands, and he was satisfied she'd taken them. Well, she testifies at his trial, and it's known that she's a sex worker, but it doesn't become an issue, and it doesn't undermine her credibility.
Mhm.
That said, in the Scotland Yard files, you do see some frustration with the women of Lambeth, who, of course, have very few friends in the police, are not in a mood to cooperate with the police,
Right.
are harassed by the police. You see some frustration with them, and a really chilling scene where Cream is identified as a potential suspect, is seen going into one of the lodging houses of a woman and emerging hours later, and the police didn't intervene. It turned out he'd mixed her a drink that she prudently didn't drink. But you're left wondering, what a cavalier thing to do. They think they're following a man who's poisoned as many as 4 women, and they let him carry on and potentially put her life at risk. So again, another sort of suggestion about a devaluing of the lives of his victims.
Right. Yeah. And I have to ask you about the Jack the Ripper connection / confusion. I'm fascinated with this.
Should we start with it as confusion? Um, if you look up Jack the Ripper, especially not coverage from a few years ago, if there's a roundup of potential Ripper suspects, Thomas Neil Cream's name appears. And that's one of the ways I found his story, because it was very common for years. He would be trotted out as potential Ripper suspect. Killed in London, killed sex workers, about the time of Jack the Ripper, good as any. Well, I mean, Jack the Ripper used knives, he used poisons, we'll overlook that. There's a bigger problem. In 1888, when Jack the Ripper was killing in Whitechapel, Cream was in prison in Illinois, serving a life sentence. So I think that's an ironclad alibi. But this myth has grown up and taken on legs that he might have been Jack the Ripper. If he bought his way out of prison, as I think I've established in 1891, well, maybe he did in 1888. But where it falls down is when I did my research. It's all based on a story in the newspapers, first appears in 1902, decade after Cream's execution, that his last words on the scaffold were, "I am Jack the," and then the trap sprung and he's cut off in purportedly mid-confession to being Jack the Ripper. Well, there's a big problem with this story. One, the statement is attributed to the hangman, a man named Billington, who was dead by then, so no way to verify it. Few papers pick it up, and then for decades, there's no mention of it again. And through the newspaper databases, you can get a very good idea of when a story surfaces. A few decades later, there are features on, believe it or not, the last words on the scaffold, famous like dying words of criminals.
Right. Someone gets the bright idea like, this will sell some papers.
This is brought up again.
Yeah.
And takes on a life of its own. And that leads to almost a mini cottage industry of conspiracy theories that, oh, he bought his way out of prison, and oh, some of the descriptions match Jack the Ripper. Some people think Jack the Ripper's a doctor. Anyway, it takes on this sort of frenetic life of its own. But it seems to all come from what we would call today fake news in 1902 that has snowballed into something else. Most recent rundowns of Jack the Ripper suspects don't have Cream on it anymore because he was in prison, and the documentation is there. It very clearly was. Scotland Yard sends a detective to Joliet prison in 1891. He interviews the warden and says, yes, he was here till 1891. It's pretty definitive. But surprisingly, I did a Jack the Ripper tour a couple of years ago, my last research trip to London, and Cream was mentioned as a possible Ripper suspect.
Oh, yeah.
So well, it refuses to die away.
Right. Yes. Which actually leads us into, we have some good questions here, and one of them is kind of connected with that. There's a question about what was the culture and coverage around true crime in the early 20th century, and I was also going to say in that same vein that, you know, we talk today. There's a lot of talk about fake news right now, but in fact, we have these modern journalistic standards that you and I are probably both pretty familiar with. I mean, I've written pieces for the New York Times, and their fact-checking process is extensive. But 100 years ago, 150 years ago, we saw a lot more biased and openly biased. Like, you know, I'm researching in the 1910s, and the two newspapers I'm spending the most time in are the Hackensack Republican and the Bergen County Democrat. That's the name of the paper. Like, it's no secret which one likes my guy and which one doesn't like my guy. It's right there. So there's that, but there is a lot of hyperbole and really straight up fiction that would never pass journalistic standards in a modern city or national newspaper today. But maybe you could talk about the kind of like the true crime vibe of newspapers during this era that you're researching.
Well, I mean, most people know there's a real explosion of interest in true crime, not just books, but all over Netflix, docuseries, movies based on true crime, and then of course online, a lot of internet sleuths, podcasts, hundreds if not thousands of podcasts looking at crimes. What's really surprising is that this really isn't anything new. I'll give you a quote that I encountered in my research. The Chicago Tribune saying that, declaring there's nothing the average reader enjoys more than a good murder with the goriest of trimmings. Now, you could see that being written today. That's from 1880.
Yeah.
And that's the thinking then. I quote George Orwell from an essay he did in the 1940s, lamenting the decline of the Great British Murder, the kind of thing that would fill the Sunday papers. He even mentioned Cream as one of the classic practitioners. And of course, in the Victorian times, I mean, murders were sensations. Huge crowds would come to public hangings, which ended in the 1860s. 5,000 people gathered outside Newgate Prison for Cream's hanging, even though it was private, it was held inside the walls, they couldn't see anything.
Mhm.
So the interest was incredible, and the newspapers reflected that. Um, and one thing I did find is there was a change in the appetite of the public for murder, less ghoulish as it had been in the early 1800s. The rise of detective fiction, and especially
Yeah.
Sherlock Holmes, really changed things into more the kind of interest in detection and detective methods and the solving of crimes that of course we see today, and I guess was my approach in the book as well. But it's a mistake to think that anything new is happening now. I mean, the scale, thanks to the internet and the media we have today, means it seems like there's more true crime. But you would know this, Amy. I mean, if you could picture this, I know in the 1800s, I would look for coverage of trials. A paper that had 4 pages could easily have 2 pages for a verbatim account of a murder case.
Mhm.
You know, you don't need court transcripts in those days. They're
Right.
in papers. And presumably, well, obviously, people are reading every word. So
Yeah.
there's always been that interest.
Yeah. Well, Dawn asks a question that's near and dear to my heart, and I'll look forward to hearing your answer to this because it's changed for me over the years. And that is, how are you organizing all this research? Physically, what's your system? Is it software? Is it note cards? What's going on at
Well,
your office?
I don't use note cards, but I do. I come from an era of paper, and I work on paper. It drives my colleagues nuts. It surprises my students. But I need to see things on paper, so I get 3-ring binders, and I start collecting, and I organize things chronologically, and every binder has a purpose. Um, that doesn't say that at some point I don't have electronic documents. I'll have images of documents in my iPad, which I often print out, just because I just need that tactile feel, and it's just the way I work. But there are a lot of software tools now that a lot of my colleagues use. But I just think you get to the point where you go with what works, and I just find that's what works for me.
Yeah, you
And it's a boon for fact checking too, because I
right.
know where everything is.
You know where everything is, and it's one of those weird things where it does have to sync with how your brain works, and there's no escaping that. There's no changing that. So it is important. And I think the great thing about paper is you can spread it out all over the floor. I mean, I completely expect you to put it up all over the walls and have like red string connecting the different, there was red string involved, I hope, at some point, connecting the victims and the map and the murders.
No,
But
I'm able to do. I mean, I do a lot of organizing in my head, but I
yeah,
mean, my my practice is gather the material and then start reading it systematically. And I always think, okay, I'll read all of this and then I'll write it. Well, I'm usually a quarter of the way in, and the light bulbs are going off, the phrasing's coming, so I start writing as I'm reviewing and filling
yeah,
in any gaps of research. Uh,
right.
but there's an overall method, but sometimes it's very story specific or
Mhm.
part of the book specific what I might do.
Yeah. Well, I became a real advocate for Evernote recently for my novels, and I wish I'd done it during Drunken Botanist because it would have been helpful to a lot of other people too to be able to share it. So, any of you who are watching this who want a vote for the software side of things, I do love Evernote. I actually teach a class on Evernote and how writers can use it because I love it so much. But that's not to say, oh, you can't quit. It's just off camera is like a big pile of papers as well.
Well,
'Cause
if I were in my home office, there'd be a bookcase bank of binders behind me.
totally
And
right.
I think I've got the name Scrivener right too. Is that's another big? I know some of my colleagues. I think it's Scrivener. Is it not?
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
used for novel writing, and I think you can store research in there as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let me look. There's a couple of questions in here that I'm going to condense into one because it's something that I was wondering about as well. And that is putting these, how you tell the story and how you put the scenes together. So you've got what actually happened. You have probably different versions of events of what happened. You have the order in which you found it all out. But then at some point, you've got to tell a story that has a beginning and a middle and an end. And you've got to decide what to leave in and what to leave out. There's probably stuff that got left out. So how do you then put it together as a narrative for us to hold in our hands and read?
Good question. Well, one, you want my answer is
Seconds or less. No.
yeah. Next question. No, well, you want a crackerjack editor, as a second reader. And you do want to shake up the structure, but it's hard to, especially when you're doing history, because your default's always going to be chronology. But Dr. Cream does start towards the end. And that was possible.
Yeah.
It was possible to tell his last murders in London because I had the lens of the investigator from Scotland Yard sent to America, Canada, United States to track him. And that allowed me to use that as the thread that I could then recreate his past in real time, if you will. So that was something negotiating with my my editor at Algonquin, Amy Gash. We put our heads together. By that I mean she says we need to do something different, and I try to find what it is.
Right.
But she's invariably right that you just want to find an engaging way of telling the story. And what you leave in and what you leave out, how you structure it. I mean, these are the real challenges because there's no one right way.
Yeah.
There's always a better way, and you want to find that. But I mean, that's happening almost line by line. Where do you start this chapter? Where do you start this part of the book? Where do you have a prologue that starts before the book starts? And all of these are decisions you make. But ultimately, it involves knowing the story well enough to know some of those storytelling possibilities. And sometimes that can be a second draft.
Sure.
That incorporates a lot of what you've done,
Yeah.
but maybe shakes it up and suddenly moves, instead of it being totally chronological, starting early with Cream's early life. No, you start with the year before he's caught.
Sure. And we have a couple of questions here that I think are good about what happens when sources conflict. What do you go with and why? How do you confirm a conflicting source? And I want to add something to that, which is injecting your research self into the narrative. Like, sometimes either you have to decide what's true and what's not, and only the true stuff goes in the book, or you sort of let the reader know, like, there's this, but there's also that, and it seems like it's more this, but let's not overlook the possibility that it's that. So, like, how did you navigate those things that you can't know or don't know, or that you have to make your own conclusion about?
Well, you're constantly doing sort of a verification process. Part of it right off the bat is, does this sound plausible? Or is it fanciful? I gave you an example, I guess, with the Jack the Ripper rumor.
Yeah.
Well, right off the bat, I mean, you have to look askance at something written a decade later, when the main witness who supposedly heard the statement is conveniently dead, and no one else, and he wasn't the only person on the scaffold at the time, no one else breathes a word of it. You can't tell me that if that was said, that Scotland Yard wouldn't have been, wait a minute, we can solve that horrible cold case that no one will let us forget about. Because even in the 1890s, Scotland Yard was under tremendous stigma of having botched that investigation. And what's the source? Is it the New York Times? Is it a small town newspaper? But is it the small town newspaper quoting the local sheriff?
Right.
That presumably adds some credence to it. is it an account that what's supposedly happened in Chicago but appears in New York paper?
Mhm.
Why isn't that reported in Chicago? And I know other writers who've done that as a test. If it's something that can't be traced back to its origin or its original place, then it's maybe more likely to have been made up at a distance.
Right.
So little tricks like that. That's why it's also important to get the original court documents, any transcripts, any that will verify everything from spellings of names that could be wrong in the paper to dates to the actual charges. So it becomes kind of a putting the whole together and seeing what supports what fills in the blanks, what seems plausible, and what suggests, for instance, the official documents suggest, well, this news report isn't quite right. Well, then you're going to start discounting other things in that particular news account, or even that perhaps in that newspaper. I hope that
Sure.
helps give some insights. Anyway, it's a great question, but it's a big question.
I know, yeah, it's super interesting, and we're almost at the end of our hour. But I love this question, and it was one that I wanted to ask you anyway. But we have it from the audience here, which is there a piece of research that didn't make it into the book that you're, the one that got it? Is there something that you weren't able to include you wish you could have?
Oh God. Well, you fight for your darlings in this kind of a
You do,
situation,
yeah.
and I can't think of anything right off. Again, I wanted this to be definitive.
Yes.
Even sometimes when I'm going back and fact checking, I'll reread a news report I haven't looked at in a couple of years since I was doing the research. I'll think, did I put that in the book? That's really good. Usually I have, but also there's so much detail that invariably you have to leave things out. But there was nothing, nothing major that there were no characters or anything like that. There was nothing, I didn't have to change the emphasis. I pretty well had the story. It was the way to tell it, or the
Right.
order to tell it in, that was challenging. One thing is, as a former newsman, I really, and I wrote a lot of headlines as an editor. I had to put in the plays on words that the headline writers did, because if you think witty headline writing is a product of the 20th or 21st centuries. I mean, in the 1880s, headlines like "bad cream" and "churning cream," and one reference to them that I had to put in the book. This cowardly man should be cremated.
Oh,
It
geez.
was so it's nice it's one of those insights into human nature where we're always suckers for a good pun.
Yes. Beautiful. Well, with that, I think we're pretty much at the end of our hour here. Thank you so much, Audrey, for having us. And one thing I want to say to everybody: I used to own an independent bookstore, and I can tell you that bookstores only stay open if people buy books. It's the one and only thing that matters. So please buy your books at Harvard Bookstore and help them keep their doors open in this very difficult time. It's the only reason writers like us get to write our books. And so thank you so much for everything you do.
Thank you so much for saying that.
Well, thank you, Amy, Audrey, everyone at the Harvard Bookshop, and everyone who's come out tonight. Thank you for your interest. And yeah, Amy, it's so great to meet you. Even though we shared a publisher, we haven't shared a stage, even a
Right.
virtual stage before, let alone a real one. And just thank you so much for your questions and the chance to talk about Dr. Crean.
Yes, thank you both so much for being here. And just to reiterate what Amy said, please support Harvard Bookstore. We're an independent business, and we're locally owned. We really appreciate any support. And to reiterate what Dean said, we have all of both Dean and Amy's books for sale. Dean's new book is linked in the chat. So if you would like to read Murderous Dr. Cream, it is in the chat, but we also have all of Amy's books for sale. Check out our website if you would like more. Again, thank you so much for sharing your Monday night with us and coming and giving us this fantastic talk. We really, really appreciate it. From all of us at Harvard Bookstore, have a great rest of your night. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.